You say younger, so when you were, let's say, 5 years old or
Sure.
older, did you both know you wanted to be writers professionally? Maybe that's
No, absolutely not.
too young of a cutoff
No,
point.
I didn't know that I wanted to become a writer until I went to college. I was studying fashion merchandising at LA Trade Tech, and hated my marketing classes, hated the accounting classes, and I took what I thought was going to be an easy A in fashion writing. I studied with Gwen Jones, who was the fashion editor of the then Herald Examiner. She was the first Black woman besides B.B. Moore Campbell that I knew wrote, that made a living as a writer. B.B. Moore Campbell was an author, and she went to my church. And I didn't understand writing as a career. I didn't know people got paid to do that. Some people don't get paid at all to do it anymore, but Gwen saw something in the work that I did, and she suggested I get an internship, and helps me get an internship at Women's Wear Daily. I haven't thought about doing anything else as a career since. There was something they talk about the power of the pen, and I got a chance to experience that and what that meant to me, how affecting my work was and the results of it. It was, like my parents come from very blue collar. My mother has a bachelor's degree. My father has an associate's degree, but they were both blue collar workers. And so, when I came home one day and told my parents, I am going to become a journalist, my dad was like, what is that and how much does that pay? Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the mentality that I grew up with. It was that you had to have a job that paid, and it had to have like benefits and all those kinds of things. But what I found with writing was that it gave me a voice in the world, and it gave me an opportunity to say something. And it also gave me an opportunity to see things in ways that I wouldn't ordinarily see. Like I could go behind the scenes of stuff and then tell everybody what I saw. And so I think for me, I came to writing, and it was something that I didn't even know I had a strength in. And so I began to develop and hone that craft, but it wasn't something that I set out to do. But now, as the world is changing and everything is now becoming content, it's about me finding a way to do the thing that I love as passionately as I did when I first started, because I don't like it being called content. It's still writing to me. It means something to me to be a writer. Like when blogging came out, I was like, no, I am a journalist. I was very proud of that. I was very proud of calling myself a writer. I'm very, very conscientious and proud of being an artist, someone who's transitioned into something that feels very artistic. And so like content doesn't sound like anything to me. And so
content sounds like stuff you don't really need to pay for.
Sure. Branded content. Now there's branded content. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that, as I've come along, holding on to that writing, that thing that says I'm a writer is what really still, because that's what drew me in, was the writing, and so there are always, calls that, I should do, I should probably be making more and doing more. But if it doesn't have anything to do with writing, I don't really care, so.
Barrington, for you, do you remember the first time you realized I want to be a writer?
Yeah, and it was not a quick realization. I think I always, you look back in hindsight, you're like, oh, I've always wanted to be a writer. But in truth, I was a huge reader as a kid. yes, it was also Indiana. Yes, it was summer. My mom would tell us to go outside and read, but then she would find me hiding behind the curtains in the air conditioning, like reading my book. Or if I had to go outside, I would there was this ditch under the highway overpass where I'd be with my, with my book. But it never occurred to me that I would be a person who would craft something and like figure out what these people would do and then what they would do next and what they would do next. Like that seemed, I think, super pie in the sky to me. Like it didn't occur to me that was something that I could do. I was a theater major in college, and I thought I was going to direct. And I look back now and I'm like, oh, a lot of the scenes that I directed that were very successful were scenes I wrote so I could direct them. But of course it was that combination that made them successful. And my jobs out of college, I had by that point, I had a pretty good stage management background, and I parlayed that into being a production coordinator for videos and industrials and commercials in Chicago. And then when I made the jump and came to LA, the same kind of thing. I did the logistics for production. I think I always thought, oh, someday I'm going to be a director, and someday somebody's going to let me be a director. But I didn't have any sense of what that, like, I just thought that you got on a set and you worked really hard and you organized things and made the phone calls, and but there's a ladder for that. There's a ladder for helping other people be creative. That you can go from production assistant to production coordinator to associate producer to producer, and that's something that I did. And it wasn't until I got married and I moved to the middle of Australia with my husband. And but I should say that I'm going to backtrack a little bit, that as a kid, I had, a bunch of spiral ring notebooks full of like just writing. So I was a journaler, and kind of all through my life, I've always been somebody who like I had to write. Right. So there was always that drive, but I kind of look back and I'm amazed. I'm like, how did I not make this connection?
That's so funny.
So I moved to Australia with my husband. He was an aerospace engineer at the time, and so it was like we lived in the desert, and like kind of in the middle of Australia, and there's like these satellite monitoring stations in the middle of the desert. And I'm like, what am I gonna do with myself? And so then I started taking some art classes, which was great, and I loved it. And I have a little bit of background in that arena as well. And then I was diagnosed with cancer in 2003. And in the wake of that, it's all a happy story. Everything's good now. But I am one of those people who kind of didn't do the chemotherapy. I like meditated and went to cancer camp and juiced carrots. And so at that point I was like, well, I don't think I should be spending, like 8 hours in the studio with like all the solvents and the stuff like for screen printing, which was kind of the main thing that I did. And so at that point I was kind of like, it was just kind of like a weird time. I was kind of physically recovering still, and I had this going on. I was like, I'm going to take a writing class at Gotham Writers Workshop, that online. They're associated with Zoetrope, and I ended up doing 2 or 3 classes through them, and they were great. I highly recommend them. So that was kind of my first official I think I tested out of English in college. You know how you do. So I don't even think I took an English class in my undergraduate career in college, and I kind of look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? All I loved to do was read. I didn't even take a literature class. But so I wrote, so there I wrote some stories, and then one day my husband, the aerospace engineer, came home and he said, there's this guy at work who's quitting to go to film school. He sucks. He's terrible at everything. He's like, if anybody should go to film school, I should go to film school. And then this kind of like over the course of a couple of days. You know, he really did love movies, and he was somebody who would watch them over and over again. He's like, I should go to film school. And then it kind of became this thing where I'm like, well, I always kind of thought, oh, I'm going to go to grad school someday. And I'm like, well, if you're going to school, I'm going to school. And I'm like, what can I go to school in? Like, because there's no grad school for production coordinators, and theater didn't seem quite right after, because I'd been working with film and video all this time. And I was like, well, I wrote these stories for the Gotham Writers Workshop thing. I'm like, I'm going to get an MFA in writing. And then it seemed like totally, I was like, yeah, that's what I should do. And so I sent my stories off, and we both got into the program at Florida. He got into the film program, and I got into the English program at Florida State. And they had a good assistantship program, like a teaching, you know, you could get a TA-ship. And so we're like, okay, that seems good. And that was a little bit down the road for me. And I had to play a lot of catch up, because it was an MFA program that was combined with a PhD program. So like the very first writing workshop I took was with a PhD candidate who had been through the Iowa Writers Workshop for his MFA. And the first thing you have to do to get into the Iowa Writers Workshop is, I think they give you this list of 100 books you need to have read before you even start the program. And, you know, so I was underread and undertrained. And I've kind of made up for that since then. I've done a lot of, I went from that program, and when we moved out to LA, then I used that to get into the screenwriting program at USC. And then I just kind of, like my day job allowed me to pick up some extra classes, and that's how we did a multi-genre writing thing at USC as well. But anyway, so it took me forever to figure out I was a writer, is the answer to that question.
That's how the two of you met?
Yeah, that's how we met.
And we weren't there at the same time.
We weren't there at the same time,
but
we were alumna. We're alumni. Alumna.
That's the plural of
yeah,
okay.
for female, the female, it's a female plural.
Right.
It's alumni, not alumni. Okay. But yes, we met at a mixer of alums, and part of the afternoon gathering, we were supposed to tell a little bit about ourselves, what we were looking to do, and what we could help someone else in the group do. And I had just finished like 6 weeks of exhaustive research into Persian culture for this screenplay adaptation of the book. And Barrington, or even I think the instructor mentioned that Barrington could help anybody with a screenplay. And so I wasn't, you know, all I wanted was an outline. So I thought, ooh, okay. So I made a beeline to her and gave her a copy of the book. And so that was kind of how we started.
Swirling.
It was swirling. Yeah. So, but it was interesting when Barrington was talking about her journaling as a young person. I did do a lot of that when I was growing up. And, you know, because I was such an avid TV watcher, I would find myself envisioning myself or people that looked like me into my favorite TV shows. And so my brother and I would sometimes like write little like guest starring roles for ourselves, and like this was how we would see this episode going.
That's awesome. You guys wrote fan fiction.
We did, but we didn't know, like,
yeah,
and
before it existed.
Yeah, and when you were saying that, I was like, you know, the fact that I decided to do a writing course in college for an easy A was because that was the thing that I did for fun. But I never imagined doing it as a profession. Like, I didn't think that was something you did. But I, you know, like I would write stories about the kids at church. Like I still have it. Like my brother asked me about it like years ago. He's like, you really should publish that. And it was called All God's Children. It was like my soap opera version of all the kids at church. I shouldn't say this. But it was like, and it was like all, because there were it was hormones. We were teenagers. It was all these cast of crazy kids from different walks of life. You know, we had kids from Inglewood and Fairfax High, and, you know, all the school rivalries and things like that. And I was the nerdy kid that all the cool kids talked to. And so I know all their secrets, and then of course I tell my brother all of them, because did you know, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, and so I wrote a little play thing, and I still have it in my stuff. It's like the one thing that I kept because it's just hysterical. And I actually won like a competition in high school for writing, and I found that while I was cleaning up recently. So yeah, it's funny. I never really thought about it, but I think I've been writing something in some kind of way my whole life.